Hello, my name is Jennifer. Idea to IPO has been holding tech startup events in Silicon Valley for many, many years. We launched officially on February 1st, 2010. At that time, we had no members and no events on our calendar. At this stage, we have over 100,000 members among all of our meetup groups all around the world. We've organized, promoted, and produced over 2,537 events. By any standard, by any measure, we are the most active, most prolific startup event organization in the history of Silicon Valley, bar none. We organize venture capital panelists, legal workshops, networking events, and more. These days, we are 100% online. We hold an event nearly every day of this week. Check out our schedule at idea2ipo.com. Our featured speaker today is Nadia Yakub, one of the top immigration attorneys in Silicon Valley. Ladies and gentlemen, Nadia, take it away.
Thanks. Welcome, everyone. This is, I think, Rob and my 7th year working together. I've been speaking to his members for 7 years now, and I've met so many amazing, inspiring entrepreneurs, tech professionals through these meetups. And I just want to, first of all, really congratulate you on your initiative in getting informed about the different visa options for working in the United States. The US has a fantastic, atmosphere for entrepreneurs and especially tech entrepreneurs and professionals. So I'm so excited to be able to speak to you. I've been practicing immigration law now for over 20 years. And this subject is very near and dear to my heart because my family immigrated through the ways I'm going to describe to you tonight. My dad and his brothers came over as international students to study. And my dad's older brother was hired by McDonnell Douglas, got a green card, naturalized, and sponsored my dad. And that's how we came. And my dad's younger brother married a US citizen and got his green card and naturalized that way. So I'm very familiar with the various pathways to permanent residence and US citizenship. And I really understand the journey. So on that note, I'm going to start a little bit with a poll because I'd love to know where you're tuning in from and what your professional orientation is. And then we'll get started with my presentation. So what I'd like to do is find out a little bit about what describes your background and where you're coming in from. So if you have just a minute or 15 seconds to look at the questions and answer, that would be wonderful. So I'll give you a couple of minutes to do that as you all come in. Okay, I'll give us one more minute at 7:05, and then we can report back the poll results. Wow, we're seeing a very nice spread of participants. Seems like entrepreneurs are in the lead for type of person who's joining us, followed closely by enterprise employees. And we have even some academics, investors. And then insofar as where people are tuning in from, we have looks like the Bay Area leads the way. And then we've got Canadians. um, Europeans, Latin America, Asia, Australia. So we have a nice variety of participants, which is perfect for this subject. Okay, I'm just going to end this now. And then I'm going to start the presentation. It looks like pretty much let in most people that are in the waiting room. Okay. All right, 7:06. I'm going to end the poll. Thank you so much for sharing a little bit about yourself. Okay. All right, so let me share the screen now. And we are going to go into and play from start. Okay, so what I am going to be talking about tonight with you is about visa options for international tech professionals, entrepreneurs, and investors. It's going to be, bird's eye view on the common visas. I'm going to get into some details on the most common routes. Definitely, we could talk about this for like a week, but this will give you a good understanding of the larger framework. And also with the new administration, while the new administration hasn't talked much right now about how it wants to support startups and investors, because it's really undoing a lot of the restrictive measures that were implemented by the previous administration. So that's really been the focus of the Biden administration, our new president, in the, since he took office last week. So the landscape in this regard hasn't really changed, but what has changed is a more welcoming approach to foreign nationals, as opposed to the last 4 years, which have probably been the most restrictive I have seen or experienced in my career. Again, as I mentioned when we started, I've been practicing for over 20 years now, and the last 4 years aged me. I think Rob could probably attest to that, but it was a very, very restrictive environment, anti-immigrant, and I think now we have a renewed commitment to being more welcoming to immigrants and foreign nationals and just their energy and spirit. So let me get started by sharing with you what we'll be covering today. Many folks start their lives in the US by studying, so by being international students. So I'll talk a little bit about your options for working as an international student. And then I'll go over the most common temporary employment-based visas. Most of these require an employer to sponsor you. And then there's a couple where you could start your own company and sponsor yourself. Those are not the majority. The majority do require an employer to sponsor you. I have one slide where I'll just briefly lay out the avenues for permanent residence, how you can move from an employment-based visa to permanent residence. I'll talk briefly about some common obstacles to getting your visa. And then, of course, right now we're facing a number of travel restrictions because of COVID. So I'll just remind everyone about which countries are facing a restriction and ways around it. And then we'll open it up to questions and answers, okay? And we'll be doing that through the chat. Now, to the extent you may be putting messages in, I am not going to be looking at those while I'm giving the presentation, but I'll definitely turn to the chat messages once I'm done. And the plan is for me to end at 8, okay, insofar as the presentation goes. All right, so let's talk about studying in the US. If you come over to the United States to study, you are going to be given usually it's an F1 visa. So that's for international students. And the status is for the duration of your study. Okay, so long as you're studying, you have F1 status. And when you complete a degree program or certain certificate programs, you will be granted 1 year of work authorization, which is referred to as OPT, optional practical training. Okay, that's generally the rule. And if you have studied a STEM field, a science, technology, engineering, or math, so STEM field, you get an extra 24 months. So what you often see is people come to the United States for a 1 year master's program, let's say in engineering, or like at Berkeley, they have a 1 year master's program. Stanford has one that's like 18 months, right? So it's not 2 years or 4 years like an undergraduate degree. What a lot of people do are these 1 year master's program, and then they get effectively 3 years of work authorization. Now, a couple of notes on the work authorization. The first year, which is just called OPT, you could work for yourself. So I have a lot of clients who start their own companies, or they've met, great folks on their studies and they co-found companies with them. That is allowed. Now, with the STEM OPT, it's technically you're supposed to have an employer who is providing you a training experience. So it can't be just your company, you're the only employee sponsoring yourself for the additional 2 years. Okay. It's perfectly fine on your 1 year of work authorization. You can start your own company, you can freelance, you can be a temp, whatever. So long as you're working in some fashion, it's okay for that 1 year. But for that additional 2 years, you need to show that there's some kind of employer providing you a training experience. I definitely have my founders who, they'll have a co-founder, they might have a board of directors where we can say, look, this person's getting a training experience. But if you're coming into the US, which a lot of folks come with the idea of, I'm going to launch my own business after I finish my studies, I just want you to know that for that STEM OPT, you have to be planning to be more than just yourself for your company. Okay. So these 3 years are fantastic though. You finish your studies, especially if it's a STEM field, you'll get 3 years. Now, if you do not study a STEM field, so if you study economics or you study, even some of these, if some of these like finance courses are not necessarily mathematics, if you study even do an MBA. Now, some MBAs are pushing to be recognized as a STEM field, but generally, if you do an MBA or if you study econ, these are not STEM fields. So then then it's hard to, you are not going to get those extra 2 years, and you will get 1 year. Now, just a real quick, I just want to say just currently because of COVID, there are some restrictions, and basically it's because most universities have gone online. And so right now, if you were to apply to a school and get admitted to a school that's all online, the US consulates are probably not going to give you a visa to come in to the US for online learning. Okay. They're probably not going to do that. Now, this policy may change, and it is changing. But essentially, the big picture is if your school is going to be all online, there may be challenges in getting a visa. Okay. And if you are from a restricted country, where we have 32 of them now, 32 countries that are restricted, there's an additional challenge to getting that visa. Now, these policies are changing very rapidly due to how COVID, is turning out, both in countries from abroad and then, of course, in the United States. So, you want to, as you are choosing the schools where you may want to study, as you are looking at it, you want to be paying close attention to, is it all online? And then you want to be paying attention to whether the consulates will give you a visa to come to the US for all online learning. Okay, generally they are not giving those visas for right now. So there's a temporary kind of freeze on this, okay, which is purely COVID related. So that's really your options as a student. It's a great way to kind of test the waters in the United States. It's a great way to establish a network. And it, you know, whether you end up staying in the United States or returning to your home country with the network and skills you gain here, it's a great investment in your life and your future. Okay, so that's the student route. Now, what I'm going to talk about next are your temporary employment-based visas, okay? And so the most common one and the most well-known one is the H-1B visa. This is for high-skilled workers, okay? That's the H-1B visa. And what does it mean to be high-skilled? Okay, there are 4 key requirements, and I'll go over these in greater detail in each following slide. But the first requirement is that the position must require at least a bachelor's degree in a specific field. Okay, that's the first requirement. The second is that there has to be an employer-employee relationship. So for those of you, you know, entrepreneurs, investors, you know, you can't come into the United States, set up a company and sponsor yourself on the H-1B. I'll talk about that also more. So that's element number 2. The third element is that you must be paid the higher of either the prevailing wage as established by the Department of Labor or the actual wage. So, you know, and I'll talk about that in a minute. And then finally, there are significant government filing fees that the employer must pay. So for those of you who are coming to work for smaller companies, smaller startups, you maybe have some contacts here and they want to sponsor you for the H-1B. There are significant government filing fees that will have to be paid by the employer. So let's talk about the wage requirement, because this is often the biggest issue for the H-1B, especially for a smaller company that doesn't have a lot of H-1Bs, or an emerging company where they just don't have a ton of money right now, you know, and they want to do something like, well, we'll give you bonus and we'll give you equity, but we can't pay you a high salary. Unfortunately, for the H-1B, you have to pay the higher of. And when I say higher, so if you're Google, Apple, Facebook, you know, these guys pay way above market, right? So for them, if they're hiring a foreign national worker to work for them as a software engineer on the H-1B visa, they have to pay them as much as they're paying their American workers. You can't say, well, the DOL says I only need to pay 100,000. So even though I pay my American workers 150,000, I'm only going to give this worker from, you know, let's just say from Indonesia, I'm just going to pay them 100,000. That's not allowed. Okay. So at the same time, there is the Department of Labor has an online wage library. It's by state, it's actually by county, and it's by occupation. So you could, when after my presentation, I will be sending out these slides, and there's a hyperlink to that salary dictionary online, the wage library. You can click on it and you can click by state, by county, and you can put in a keyword for your occupation, and you will have a sense of what the prevailing wages are for a particular occupation, right? So whether it's software developer, whether it's a management consultant, management analyst, sales engineer, Those are our most common. Software developer is probably the most common occupation for H-1B workers. Another emerging field now is data science. So we have a lot of statisticians. And so that's the prevailing wage. Okay, so it's established by the Department of Labor. You can go in, it's by county, state, and by occupational category. And so your employer has to pay you the higher of either that wage or what it's paying to the American workers. Okay. And bonuses, equity, stock options, that does not count. It's base salary. Okay. So that's an important requirement for the H-1B. The next important requirement is that there has to be an employer-employee relationship. What that really means is the US government hates staffing companies, placement companies, and the government has really taken a tough stand on a lot of these, what they think are IT consulting firms, where it's just they're placing them on all these projects. And the government's view, which is a little disconnected from reality, is that, oh, these kinds of IT consulting firms, they don't pay a lot and it's hurting US workers. So because of that, they don't like, these IT staffing companies. They don't like temp agencies, placement companies. Do these exist? Yes. Do H-1Bs get approved for them? Yes. But the likelihood is not high. So you want to be careful. There's a lot of companies that will say, well, you can pay me, I'll sponsor you for the H, and then I can put you on projects. Just want to be careful. There's a possibility that could get denied. Okay. But it could also work. It does. But in general, what the government wants to see is that you are an employee of the company that's going to sponsor you for the H-1B. It's okay if you don't work at their office. Right now, because of COVID, no one's working in an office. They're all working remotely. It's also fine if you go work at a client site, like if you're working for Ernst & Young or Deloitte or McKinsey, you could be at client sites, and that's okay. What's not okay is if you are starting your own company and sponsoring yourself. That's not acceptable. It's not acceptable for you to be a freelancer for the company sponsoring you. And as I mentioned earlier, they don't like staffing companies. Okay. So now here's a question I get from all my, investor, like tech entrepreneur clients is, well, what if I start my own company but I'm my employee, and I have a co-founder and I have other employees, can my company sponsor me? Well, it could, if you can show that you have a board of directors and that your ownership interest, even if it's significant, you can still be pushed out. So long as we can show that, it could succeed. Now, it's possible it doesn't succeed, but you have to think carefully about setting up a company where you could be pushed out, if you want that H-1B visa. But that is a workaround for those of you entrepreneurs, investors who want to start your own company, sponsor yourself for an H-1B. The way to do that is to make sure you have maybe a co-founder, maybe you have some employees, and you have a board that can basically remove you from your executive role. Okay. So that's the employer-employee relationship. And we talked about the wage requirement. We talked about the degree requirement. And then we've now talked about the filing fees, which the employer must pay. Okay. These can be substantial. So especially for my clients who are going to work for small companies or emerging companies, they just need to budget this in because they are required to pay these amounts. So what are these amounts? They are $460 base fee, $500, which is a anti-fraud fee, $750 if you are an employer with 25 or less employees. So for the smaller companies, for the larger companies, it's 26 and over, it's 1,500. And then if you want a decision quickly, which is in 2 weeks, it's $2,500 extra. Otherwise, you're waiting for 3 to 4 months. Okay. So those are the filing fees. All right. Now let me tell you the biggest challenge to the H-1B. The biggest challenge to the H-1B is not just the salary, not the government filing fees. The big challenge is actually that there is such a high demand for H-1B visas that actually there is by statute in America, we have a limit to the number of H-1B visas we can give in any 1 year. And the problem is that number just does not reflect the size of our economy and the number, there's just the strength of our tech industry, especially. And so there's such a high demand for these visas that what's ended up happening is there is a lottery every year for H-1B visas. But let me back up and tell you a little bit about the numbers. So first of all, there's a 65,000 H-1B visas every year, of which 6,800 are for nationals of Singapore and Chile. So I don't know if there's our Singaporeans and Chileans in our audience, but if there are, you have actually a special H-1B visa and it's not ever used up. And there are 6,800 of H-1Bs just for you if you are from Singapore or Chile. Okay, so what that really does is it cuts that number down to about 58,000. Okay, then we have an extra 20,000 for students who have obtained a US master's degree. Okay, so we have about 78,000 H-1B visas available every year. Okay, and what happens is because the demand is so high, on average every year we have about 230, 240, 210,000 employers wanting H-1B visas. So what happens is in the first 3 weeks of March, for the first 3 weeks of March, employers file just an online form. Okay, you file an online form submitting a registration on behalf of a foreign national that you want to hire. And it's a $10 government filing fee. Okay, and it's a pretty short form, and you file it. And the last week of March, USCIS takes all those registrations and runs a lottery, a random lottery. And the first week of April, you find out if you were selected or not. Okay? So that's the lottery. And then you have 90 days to file the H-1B petition. Your employer does. And after that, you have, let me do this. After that, what happens is once you're approved, you can begin working on October 1. Okay, so there's some timing limitations, but essentially what's happening is, you have this lottery, it's in March, you find out in April, your employer files, and then if it's approved, you get to start work on October 1. So there's, you got to see if you get selected, and then there's some waiting. So for companies, sometimes it can be frustrating because there's all this waiting involved. But one thing that has happened with this administration, with the previous administration, what the Trump administration wanted to do is they wanted to rank registration by salary. So what they wanted to do, the last administration, was only let the highest paid people get selected. Okay, so we have to see if this administration actually lets that happen. But that is one problem that the last administration proposed right as they were leaving, is that for this year's lottery, they want all the registrations to ask what level salary you'll be paying the candidate. And then there are 4 levels. They were going to rank them and pick the ones at the highest level. So they're basically favoring those positions that are the highest paid. So we'll see if that actually is implemented for the lottery this year in March. Okay, so that's the H-1B lottery and how it works. Now, just if you are going to go work for a university, or if you are going to go work for a research organization that is nonprofit, then you don't have to worry about the lottery. And of course, once you're in, if you want to change employers, which you can do, you just have to have the new employer file it for you. None of the lottery doesn't matter. Okay. So how much can you work? Because a lot of people ask, especially with smaller companies, emerging companies, a lot of people ask, well, do I have to work full time? Like they can't offer me full-time work. That's fine. You can work part-time. You can't work less than 20 hours a week, but you can certainly work part-time. And you can also actually hold, let's say, 2 H-1Bs, one full-time, one part-time. Okay. And that's some of my tech entrepreneur clients do. They are working for, let's say, a large company, and then they want to work part-time for a small startup. And so long as there's no conflict of interest between those 2 companies, they can hold 2 H-1Bs. An important thing to know is that when you do get that H-1B, you're tied to that employer. So if you get an H-1B to work for Infosys or Tata, and you come here on an H-1B, you can't go and work for Apple without Apple sponsoring you for an H-1B. Okay, so it's really tied to your sponsoring employer. So you cannot work for someone else without authorization. All right. Now, a lot of high-skilled people are married to other high-skilled people, and they want to bring in their spouses. Spouses and children under 21 can come, but they cannot work. There are certain exceptions to that. And that is if you're far along in the green card process. So it's not, if you've just come on an H-1B, technically your spouse cannot work. Now, the one thing the Biden administration has proposed in the U.S. Citizenship Act, which it's just sent to Congress, so it's a new legislation. One of the things the Biden administration wants to do is provide work authorization for H-1B workers, so for your spouses. So if you are coming with your spouse, they get a status called H-4. Right now, they don't have authorization to work, but the hope is that they will. But what a lot of my H-1B spouses do is they study here. Okay. And then insofar as if you're an H-1B worker, you can live in the US for 6 years in H-1B status. You can extend past the 6 years if you are sponsored for permanent residence. Okay. And so then you can work beyond the 6-year max while your permanent residence is in process. All right. So now let me just tell you, there's just a current temporary restriction on new H-1B workers. Okay. And that has been extended to March 31, 2021. This was something that the Trump administration released at the end of last year, right? As December 31st, 2020, they said, okay, we're extending this prohibition to March 31, 2021. The Biden administration hasn't touched this yet. So right now, any new H-1B workers are not allowed into the United States unless your work is in the national interest. Of course, if you were in the US, like let's say you were a student, you got your H-1B selected and approved, then if you were in the United States, on June 24th, 2020, you're not subject to this ban. And so there's another exception if your employer is a member of these 5 organizations, then there's also an exception for you. And that's, really technical, but your employer would know if you are exempt from this general restriction that is temporary, and it will hopefully lift by March 31, 2021. Okay, so right now we have a freeze on those. Okay, so that's the H. Let me tell you about the next most common visa. And this is a fabulous visa for those of you, especially what I find from these meetups is so many of you are real globetrotters, very international. And so this could be a perfect visa for you. And this is the L1 visa, and it's for intra-company transferees. Okay, what does that mean? It's that you work for an international company and you're coming to work in the United States as an executive or manager or worker with specialized knowledge. Okay, so you have to be working for an international company. International is defined as operating in 2 countries or more. So long as it's operating in 2 countries, the US and India, for example, which is, a lot of my clients. I have a lot of Indian clients, and they are, let's say they have one company in India and then they have a company in the US. That's international. And so then they can transfer their staff to the United States. Okay. So long as they're coming to work as an executive, a manager, or worker with specialized knowledge. Now, they can only come once they have been working abroad for at least 1 year. Okay, so you have a 1-year requirement. So you have to work overseas for 1 year. So now if you get a job with an international company in Turkey or Iran or wherever, you can then, after working for 1 year there, you can apply for a transfer and work in the United States for the US entity. Okay. The other option is, let's say, you run a family business in your home country, right? You are in Bangladesh or the Philippines or the UK, and you run a really, really fantastic family business that you want to expand to the United States. Well, you could set up a US entity and get an L1 to open a new office in the US. Okay. Now, of course, you have to show that there's like your business in your home country is substantial enough that suddenly an office in the US is necessary. So I've had clients in New Zealand, for example. There is just a group of 5 people, and they wanted, they have this company in New Zealand. It's 5 of them, and they wanted to set up a US office and transfer 3 of them here. Well, that's not going to work. Right? That's just too small, both in New Zealand, and it doesn't justify 3 of them coming over here. That would leave 2 people in New Zealand. So, you have to show that it has to make sense to the government. But that is the L1A visa and the L1B for specialized knowledge workers. Okay, so let me tell you a little bit about the fees, because the government filing fees for a lot of the visas are significant. So for the L, it's about $1,000 for just the basic fees. And then if you want a quick decision, which is a decision in 15 days as opposed to several months, sometimes it can be from 3 to 7 months. So to speed things up, you can pay an extra $2,500, and it's called premium processing, and you can get a decision in 15 calendar days. Okay. Insofar as how long you can stay on the L1, the L1B, which is for specialized knowledge workers, you can stay for 5 years. And for L1A, which is for executives and managers, you can stay for 7 years. Now, little note on the executives and managers, you actually have a green card available to you. So you can move from the L1A to an international manager executive, basically an applicant for permanent resident. as an international manager or executive. Okay. And the real bonus to the L1 category is that your spouses can work. So I have many clients where they have brought their family business to the United States, and both husband and wife, you know, one spouse is the L1A, you know, setting up the company, but actually the spouse is also working for that company in L2 status. So I see that a lot with my clients. Okay, so that's the L1. Let me tell you again, we're facing a restriction on the L1 workers based on that previous proclamation. Same thing. Right now, we are not allowing in new L1s until March 31, 2021, unless your work is in the national interest. Okay. Now, again, if you were physically in the United States when the ban took effect, this doesn't apply to you. And if you're, you know, if you or your company was a member of one of these 5 organizations that challenged the proclamation and were successful, you are exempt. Okay. All right. This is another category, you know, and I really think this is a good one for you if you are not interested in studying in the United States. And you know, the truth is, it's so expensive to study in the United States. So if you're thinking, you know, I've already studied in my home country, you know, I've studied a lot in Australia or Germany or wherever you are, and I don't want to study anymore. Another way just to get a taste for the United States, maybe to work in a tech firm or a startup, is to apply for the J1. This is for trainees or interns. So it does assume that you are young, insofar as you're a young professional. So what the details are is, you know, an internship. So if you want to come in on the J1 as an intern, it means that you are either studying in your home country or you've just graduated. Okay. And you can stay for up to 12 months. A traineeship category of the J1 allows you to stay for 18 months. And it's for someone who's a recent graduate and hasn't been working for more than 5 years. So really for the for the young professional. Okay. And the reason you want a J1, because the truth is you can't just come in as a visitor and do an internship in the United States, because interns are considered employment. So you need the visa for it. And so the J1 is a great option for, again, just seeing, is this, you know, is this where I want to be? Is this where I want to launch a business? Making those connections, getting a sense of the US, maybe what state, what part of the US you want to be in. But there are a lot of startups and a lot of companies that offer J1 internships and traineeships. Okay. So I would encourage you to look at the J1 visa as an option if you're not interested in studying, or if you're really interested in just getting that work experience. The J1 could be just the right visa for you. Now, again, there's a restriction on J1s for right now. Same as for the H and the L and the J. So during the Trump presidency, he basically put a stop on all these different employment-based visas, the H-1B, the L for intercompany transferees, and the J1 workers for trainees and interns. Okay, it extended to au pairs too, but for our purposes, he completely put a stop on those, and he extended that to March 31, 2021. Okay, so that's the J1. Now, let's talk about the E-visa. Now, this is a great visa for traders and investors. So let me explain what that means. So first of all, this E-visa is an investor visa. This is different from the green card for which used to be the $1 million green card, which now is $1.8 million. This is a different category. And first of all, you must be a national of a treaty country. Okay, so the US does not have a treaty with every country for the e-visa. So there's a link, the list of e-countries. You can click on it and see if your country is on there. Um, India, China, Russia, Brazil, these countries do not have a treaty with the United States. Pakistan does, and of course the Schengen states, Canada, Mexico, Australia, all of these states do have treaties. And what that means is if you want to invest your money from abroad into the United States and you own at least 50% of whatever business you create, in the United States, then you can have an e-visa. There are two categories. One is if you are trading in goods. Okay, so for example, Pakistan, which is where I'm originally from, there's a lot of people on E1s because they trade towels, rugs, textiles, right? Okay, or you could be an E2, which is where you're just investing cash in the United States to run a business. So it's not passive income. I get this question all the time. What if I want to play on the stock market? What if I have all this money and I want to play on the US stock market? That's considered passive. What if I want to buy an apartment building? What if I'm going to buy condos? That's passive. What they want to see is that you have created a business that is a real and operating enterprise that is straight from the regulations. That's the language. A real and operating enterprise that's generating jobs, that's generating expenses, that's not just for you to live in the United States, okay? It's for more than just that. So, there are actually businesses for sale for the E. So I have some clients from Italy who bought a small gelato shop in San Diego and used that to get an E. So the common question I get about the E is, well, how much money? What's the minimum amount I need to invest to get the E? And that really, there's really nothing under the law. There's no number. What is required by law is that the amount makes sense for the business. Now, of course, the US is not going to allow you and possibly your spouse and children to all come over and live in the United States, and your spouse gets work authorization for an investment of, $50,000. I mean, the general rule of thumb, the general rule is you want to be investing at least 100,000. Okay, some people can do it with less. Some people have done it with 60, 70. I also have clients who study here and then they do OPT. They study here as international students. They do OPT. They are unable to find a job. So let's say they are a national of a treaty country. Like I had a client from Korea, which has a treaty. Then she set up her own law firm and she invested some family money to set up her own law firm. But partly we argued that her studies were an investment, right? So that's the e-visa for investment in the United States. Okay, so some key takeaways: it's not for passive income, it's not to play on the stock market or buy real estate. There's no set minimum amount. It has to make sense for the business. But in terms of just some logistics, you file at the US consulate generally. If you're in the United States, you can file to change your status, but most people file at the consulate in their home country. What they file is that they show all the materials for the business that they've set up in the United States. And then they say, oh, here's my business in the United States that I've set up. I'd like to get a visa so I can go and oversee it. And so that's what they do. And it's valid indefinitely. I mean, you get a 5-year visa or shorter for some countries, like France has a shorter one. Some countries have shorter visa, but generally 5 years. And you can renew in 2-year periods. And you could do this for 10, 15 years. The biggest users of the E program are Japanese, Germans, BMW uses the e-visa. So that's the e-visa. And again, as I mentioned, your spouse gets work authorization. So it's a great visa. Okay, so that's the E. Now, my favorite visa is the O1 visa for individuals of extraordinary ability. I always find these, just to be so much fun, and I'm always inspired by the people I meet, and I learn so much about what they're doing. So what is it? The O1 visa is for individuals who, just to have these are straight from the regulations, but the language is sustained, which means you really are like you have a body of expertise, and you have been recognized as a leader in your field, whether it's in the sciences, arts, education, business, or athletics. Okay, so you are coming to the US to work in your area of extraordinary ability. Okay. So yesterday I had a consultation with someone. He's like, well, what about if, can I get an O1 to be a professional poker player? And I was like, well, that's not really, you're not coming to work. But the bottom line is, you want to be coming to work for an employer. So an employer will sponsor you to work in your area of extraordinary ability. I've actually done these for a lot of, when I first started practicing, I worked for a large firm in New York, and we did O1s for movie stars, models, singers, famous singers. So we did O1s for, these types of individuals, but you don't have to be a movie star or a model to get an O1. I do a lot of O1s for my tech entrepreneurs, my tech professionals. And I will talk about what it takes to be categorized as someone of extraordinary ability in just a moment. But let me just tell you that you get it for 3 years at first, and then you renew it every year in 1-year increments for as long as you want. So that's generally the movie stars and, the singers. They don't really want to live here permanently. Your spouse does not get work authorization. And there's also a green card based on being an individual of extraordinary ability. So for a lot of my clients, they first get this O1, and then by the 3-year mark, they apply for a green card based on extraordinary ability. So now what's the criteria? The evidentiary criteria. So the regulations start by saying evidence that the beneficiary has received a major internationally recognized award, such as a Nobel Prize. So, I always say this when people read this, they just think, that's not me. I haven't gotten a Nobel Prize. And I have to tell you, in my 20 years of practice, I have met one Nobel Prize winner for who wanted to get an O1. But most of my clients, what they do is we are able to show at least 3 of the following 8. And that's what's required by regulation. 3 of these 8. And what are they? They are national or international awards in your field, published material about you or your work. And I have to tell you very honestly that there are PR firms that you can hire in the US who can get you quoted in TechCrunch, Forbes, all these articles. You just have to pay a lot of money, but you can get public material published about you or your work if you're serious about the O1. Scholarly articles. First thing USCIS officers do, that's the Citizenship and Immigration Services. First thing they do, get on Google Scholar. They look you up. How many articles have you published? How many times have those articles been cited, right? Being asked to judge the work of others in your field. So a lot of my tech professionals, tech entrepreneurs, they judge hackathons, they judge, pitch your idea. So that's being asked to judge the work of others. For a lot of my academics, they're doing reviews of academic papers, they're reviewing articles. So the next category is membership in associations that require outstanding achievement. So associations where you have to apply important and original contributions. Generally for that, we show patents. We sometimes show papers that you've presented at conferences, which have been really innovative. maybe you've come up with a best practice in your industry, not your company, your industry, high salary compared to others in your field, and then employment in a critical role for established organizations. So those are the 8. And of these, you need to show 3. And if you're serious about the O, you may not be there now, but you could be there in 4 to 5 years. And so what I encourage you to do is print out these criteria, maybe create 8 Dropbox folders or 8 Google Drive folders of these criteria, and then just start collecting, start making opportunities happen for yourself. Okay, so now what we'll do is, and unfortunately, I can't see when I'm in person, when I do these presentations live. I love to find out from the audience what nationality they are, because there are some visas that are for specific nationals. So the first one that I'm going to talk about real quickly is the E3 visa for Australian nationals. So if you're Australian, you could actually get what is a high skilled worker visa, but they're just for Australian citizens. There are 10,000 available every year. They've never been used up. So there's never that limit is never reached. You must be coming to work in a specialty occupation. So the standard is very similar to the H-1B. You must also show that you are paid either the prevailing wage or the actual wage. If that's higher, you have to show an employer-employee relationship. So if you are starting your own company and you're Australian, the E3 is not the right visa for you. You can't be a controlling shareholder, okay? The good news is it's valid indefinitely. You get it in 2-year increments, but you could stay, 10, 12, 14 years and on the E, unlike the H-1B, which is 6 years, or the L-1, which is 5 or 7 years. So this is great. And then your spouses can come with you and they can get work authorization. And your spouses do not have to be Australian. Okay, so I have a client, he's Australian, his wife is from China, she's Chinese, and she gets the E3 status and she gets work authorization. Okay, so the next category is for Canadians and Mexicans. So this is the TN visa. It originates from the NAFTA treaty, North American Free Trade Agreement, which is now just called the US-Mexico-Canada Agreement. And so you must be a national of either Mexico or Canada. And it's basically you're coming to work in an occupation that is listed on the schedule of recognized occupations. So it's quite limited. It's not like the H-1B or the E-3. It's very science oriented. And unfortunately, a very unfortunate trend over the last 4 years was to restrict the economist occupation so that it couldn't be used by financial analysts and investment bankers. So that's been a very unfortunate development. Hopefully that'll change. But there was some restrictive readings of the occupations, but for my tech professionals, all of them coming in either as a software engineer, computer systems analyst, we are able to get them in on the TN. There's no minimum wage requirement, but it's also not suited for you to start your own company. So if you, again, are an entrepreneur, investor, you want to start your own company, the TN is not really the way to go. You can't set it up and sponsor yourself, but you could use the E visa, the investor visa that I described earlier in my presentation. Now the TN is also valid indefinitely. It's given in 3-year increments. I have clients who've been here working on TNs for like 10, 11 years. There does come a point where the government's like, when are you going home? But there's no limit under the statute. The only unfortunate thing is that your spouses don't get work authorization. Let me quickly tell you about, now that we've covered all the temporary employment-based visas. Let me quickly tell you about the big picture view on permanent residence. Okay, so the avenues for permanent residence are employment. So you have an employer sponsor you. The only exception is if you are an individual of extraordinary ability or your work is in the national interest. Those two employment-based categories you can actually sponsor yourself. There's also family-based category. There's about 4 or 5 relative relationships that are recognized for this. And the Biden administration is very keen on removing backlogs and increasing the number of green cards that can be given both on family and employment. There is something called the diversity visa lottery, which is actually the green card lottery. It happens every year in October. I encourage you all, if you are of a country that is allowed to register, because not all countries are eligible for the green card lottery, but if you are of such a country, I encourage you to apply every year. The US, they get about 15 million submissions, and about 55,000 green cards are awarded each year. The Biden administration hopes to increase that to 80,000. So could have some numbers increasing. There's also asylum. If you are afraid to go home, or if you're afraid of your life in your home country and you come to the United States, you can seek protection, and that is called asylum. Okay, so you have to fear harm in your home country, and you have to fear it on a protected ground, such as race, religion, nationality, political opinion, or membership in a particular social group. Okay. And then there's investment. So if you are investing $1.8 million in the US and you can generate 10 jobs for US workers, you could get an investment-based green card. Okay. Now, after you get a green card, you can apply for citizenship after 5 years. And if you are actually married to a US citizen, then you can apply for citizenship in 3 years if you are still married to the US citizen. So those are avenues for permanent residence. Okay. And if you are interested, I can sign you up for a client alert that I send out every month. That's a visa bulletin, and it tells you, you know, where the government's working on these different applications. Okay. All right, now there are some restrictions right now for immigrant visas. So anyone who's outside the country and applying for a green card from outside, it's where they're doing immigrant visa processing. You may already know this. It's suspended until March 31, 2021. So these are all the categories that they are not moving forward with. So if you're a parent of a US citizen, adult children of US citizens, spouses and children of green card holders, that's LPR, all employment-based immigrant visas. So there's a suspension right now until March 31. But if you're married to a US citizen, you can see you'd be exempt from this. Okay, so that's hopefully going to lift at the end of March. Now, some common obstacles I just want to warn you about to getting a visa. Just, you know, if this is in your past already or something that comes up for you, if you are in the United States and it comes up for you, this could be a limitation for you. So what are they? Number one, if you have a J1 and you have what is called a 2-year home residency requirement. So if you've ever held a J1 or want to hold a J1, those are for the interns and trainees. The J1 is also available for scholars. You want to make sure that you are not subject to the 2-year home residency requirement. If you are, you have to complete it before you get a certain kinds of visas or your green card. Another problem is if you've overstayed your previous stay by more than 180 days, then you are unable to come back to the United States for 3 years. And if it's more than 1 year that you've stayed in the US without authorization, then there's a 10-year bar to returning to the US. The other thing is when I say bad memory, it's people often say, I've never been arrested or never been convicted of any offense. They'll say that, and then they get fingerprints done and something will pop up. Now, if something pops up and you've said, oh, I've never been arrested or convicted, you will be charged with fraud. And that is a real obstacle to getting a visa. And then, of course, if you do have a criminal record, let's say you are honest and you say, well, I was arrested for this or I was convicted for this. I think the first thing you want to do is talk to an immigration attorney before you disclose anything. And of course, because there's a way of disclosing. And if you are someone who is right now in the middle of a criminal issue, you definitely want to talk to an immigration attorney so that you can minimize the immigration consequences. So basically, if you've got criminal record, arrest, conviction, you just want to talk to your attorney about how to handle that. All right, that can be a real bar to getting a visa or a green card. Now, just to wrap up, I know we're with COVID, there's a number of travel restrictions in place. Currently, there are 32, okay? We just added South Africa, and that will be taking effect on the 30th. And so we've got Brazil, China, Iran, the European Schengen area, which has those 26 states, UK, Ireland, and South Africa. I do want to tell you one workaround for this is if you spend 14 days in a non-restricted country, then you can travel into the US. So a lot of my clients have actually been going to Dubai and spending 14 days there. Just so you know, Canada is not letting people do this in Canada. So that's not an option. Mexico is. So if you're comfortable going to Mexico for 14 days, you could hang out there and then come into the US. Okay. The other exception is if you need to come in for national interest. Okay. And this restriction applies to everybody that's not a US citizen or LPR. I mean, if you are an H-1B worker, and this has happened to my clients, I had clients who were in Europe when these restrictions took effect and they were not allowed back in. And we had to beg for a national interest exemption for them. So this is a broad restriction, okay? All right, so we're just coming to the end of my slides. I do want to tell you that I have a podcast series that I created, Inside Immigration. It's got 12 episodes. One of my most popular ones is about, I interviewed a tech recruiter. She's a recruiter for 30 years in Silicon Valley. And I asked her how people can foreign nationals can get the attention of companies and get the attention of recruiters, and how to talk about visa sponsorship. So that's actually my most popular podcast episode. I also have one with a former asylum officer on what it takes to have a successful asylum claim. I have one with an immigration judge. I have one with a criminal defense lawyer, but I also have ones just breaking down each of these visa categories, the O, the H, the F1. So if you want to take a deep dive into one of these visa categories, those podcast episodes are there. And then, there's my team, and I would love it if you could connect with me on LinkedIn. Please send me an invite. I'll be sending out my slides to all of you with a recording of this presentation. And I'd be so happy to stay in touch. Like I said, I've been giving presentations for Rob's Idea to IPO group for 7 years now. And I've just met wonderful clients, and a lot of people have become my clients through this, and I've actually helped many of them get their green cards and their visas and citizenship. So I'd love to be a resource to you. Okay, so I'm going to stop the share, if that's okay, so I can see these chats that are coming through. 1 second, and then I will read the chats and go from there. Okay, let's see here. Okay, so can I be employed on an F2 visa? No, you're not authorized to work. unpaid employment. It depends on what state you are in the US, but generally unpaid employment is considered employment. And so that's working without authorization. So you want to be careful if you're doing internships. The conservative view is an internship is employment. If you're just volunteering and it's, maybe a few hours a week or something like that, that's not employment. But it could be a way for you to, meet people, get that relationship going, and then get sponsorship for a visa from there. Yeah. Okay. Okay, so how easy is it for a Canadian to get sponsored for an oil and gas company? So I'd have to look, it would depend on your role, but if you're an engineering role, you should be able to qualify for a TN so long as you have a degree that matches. How is the situation for a geologist to find a job? I'd have to see if a geologist is on the schedule of occupations. But if you want to send me an email, I can double check it and I can tell you if a geologist would qualify under the TN schedule. I think a lot of it is the employer. You'd have to find an employer willing to sponsor you. So there's two pieces as a Canadian. Okay, so here's another one. I'm a Canadian citizen. Hi, Mike, with a PhD in structural engineering, and I got an EB1 I-140 approved in about 2 months in 1998. Now I want to adjust my EB1 I-140. It sounds like it's from 22 years ago. Is that possible? 1998? It might be best if you send me a private message, Mike, because, if that's an I-140 from 22 years ago, if that's my, then I don't think you'd be able to move forward. Okay. Sorry, I'm just going through, is there can I start the adjustment process after all these years? No, I don't think you could. Yes, there's a question about, I was late. Is it possible to get a recording or the slide set? Hi, Carla. Yeah, Carlo, yes. We are going to be sending out a link with the recording. Hi, Keval. Can an Indian citizen working in the US on an H-1B visa work for a company in India part-time? So if you are going to India physically to work for them, that's fine. If you are working for them part-time from the US in the evening, that should also be fine. I think the key is you want to look at how much income you're making from this part-time employment, and talk to your accountant about how to report that income, which you are physically earning in the United States. Okay. All right. Okay. I plan to visit the US, maybe in Michigan, Detroit for research collaboration, one of university in US, 6 to 12 months. And for a while, I'll be working as a freelancer business consulting. I think the university should arrange for the visa for you. I'm suspecting they will probably do a J1 research visa for you. You want to be careful about the 2-year home residency requirement because you're from Indonesia. And insofar as a freelancer business consulting, again, you want to be careful about doing that. The key is if you are coming for a research collaboration, that's what you want to be doing primarily. Freelance business consulting, I mean, it's a gray area. You shouldn't be doing that. Do people do it? Yeah, of course. And so then it's a question of that shouldn't be what you are primarily doing. Okay. So essentially moonlighting, what are legal implications of doing so? I think I answered this question, Keval. It shouldn't hamper your legal status in the US so long as you are doing what is, your H-1B, which is the primary reason you're in the United States. If you're working for a company in India part-time in the evenings, it just goes back to that income. Okay. Yep, Trump hurt. He hurt so many people and companies in so many ways. U.S. has a lot of wrongs to fix. Nadia, do you think will USA be able to do that in the next 12 to 24 months? Or the wrongs will never be fixed? Well, I'm very hopeful of the Biden administration, and I'm also particularly hopeful because unlike President Obama, Biden has a majority in Congress. It's very slim, it's by one person, but we are not dealing with what Obama did. And so Biden is proposing a lot of the wonderful things that President Obama proposed, but couldn't get through. So I'm optimistic that we are going to see a real change. I think, I think President Biden, if you look at his 6 executive orders that he released in the first day of coming into office that have to do with immigration, you can check them out. I have a blog post on his executive actions that he's taken and all the measures he's taken within days of starting. And it's very positive. I mean, one of the things he wants to do actually is get rid of the word alien. He wants it to be, foreign national, which is something I've been doing. That's what we as immigration lawyers have been doing for 20 years. We just feel like the word alien is not appropriate. And finally, we have a president who's saying, yeah, I want that word to get out of our language. Okay. Does the OPT work for online master's course done from a US university? I think you'd want to talk to that university, but an online master's course, if you're doing it from abroad, it's unlikely you're going to get the OPT, but you should talk to the university about that. What's the minimum eligible salary if it gets approved? I'm not sure which visa you're talking about, but generally for prevailing wage, it depends on where you'll be working and what occupation you'll be working at. So that's how there's a wage library link in my slides. You can click on that and then you can look up by state, county in that state, and occupational category. And that's how you'll see level 1 is the lowest salary range. There's someone who he has designed a valuable technology, something that companies which are active in social networking field can set a long-term strategy based on its numerous features. That sounds exciting. Working with big companies requires a lot of paperwork and it's conditioned. I'm looking for some easier step to start with. Please let me know what is your advice. So a lot of this, if you want to set up a company, it depends on your nationality, as the slides probably you saw. Depends on your nationality, depends on how much investment money you could put in. If you're someone of extraordinary ability that's got a really great product, maybe that's a way to do it. Can I work full-time with H-1B and part-time with EAD? I don't think so, because you have to commit to one or the other. You may be, the employers wouldn't know, but if you apply for your green card, when you apply for your adjustment of status application, it's going to be confusing. So I think the best thing to do is to commit to one. As a practical matter, you may be able to get away with this. But when you apply for your green card, they're going to be looking at, which one did you work with? So it just could cause some confusion. Even after H-1B is approved, what does the green card wait time look like for Indians? That's a great question. The green card wait time for Indians is very long because there is an annual limit to the number of green cards that can be given to any one nationality. Okay, so there's a 7% limit. And what that means is for countries like India and China, where we have the most applicants for green card based on employment, there's a long backlog. As by comparison, for family-based cases, our backlogs are for Filipinos and Mexicans. Indians are in there too, but generally, for Indians, they're saying the wait could be 10 to 15 years for the green card. Now, the Biden administration does want to change that. They want to remove that limit on nationality. They want to give more visas for so that annual limit of the number of green cards is very small. And then on top of that, there's a 7% limit of that small number to any one nationality. So this administration is hoping to change those numbers, increase the amount of visas available to Indians and Chinese. So it could be that the wait times decrease. Okay. I was rejected twice for a B1 visa. That's a visitor visa. So I was rejected twice for a B1 visitor. What is the probability of getting success next attempt? Generally, if you've been denied twice, the only way to get a visa is of the same visa is to show that the circumstances have changed from your prior visa applications. You really, one is you want to give it a little bit of time, and two is you want to have a different set of facts around the visit. So unfortunately, I'll be very honest, if you're a young single man applying for a visitor visa, they're pretty strict. Like they have to see that you're coming back. You need that round trip ticket come home. You have to show that you have a bank account in your home country, and you have a job that you're going to come back to. So they really want to see that there are ties that will bring you back to your home country. Okay. I'm sorry about those denials. So Indians can't apply for e-visa. That is correct. I think day trading isn't passive investment. It might be considered as an active work. It hasn't worked so far. So VC partners can get E. Sure, it depends on, it depends on what country you're from. And you could set up an investment firm. Yeah. Can I buy an apartment building that I need to find and manage the tenants? Unfortunately, no. That is not going to qualify for an employment-based visa or any kind of visa. Okay. Is day trading allowed on H-1B? You would need to have an employer sponsor you. So if then the question is, the question is, if you have an employer that does day trading and they hire you, then we would have to understand the job duties more, and then we'd have to see what your degree is in and see that there's a match. I don't normally see this as an H-1B. Can a minor get an O-1? Yes, they can. I am Canadian. If I open a company in the US, I can only work in my own company. Is that how it works? Can I hire locals from USA to work for my company without any limitations? What taxes must I pay on a monthly basis? I am Canadian. If I open a company in the US, you can only work for your own company, I'm assuming, because you're coming in to oversee it. So you're Canadian, you're probably you're thinking about an e-visa. You wouldn't have authorization to work for anyone else without the visa for that employment. What you could do though, as an e-visa holder, because Canada has a treaty, what you could do is you could engage with other, if someone wants to hire your services, they could hire your firm and pay your firm for your professional services that presumably you're doing with your company. Can I hire locals? Yeah, absolutely. Without any limitations. I mean, you have to comply with local labor laws, like state laws, and tax laws. What taxes must I pay? So that is not really my area of expertise because it depends on each state. So like some states don't have as many taxes as others. And for example, if you had a business in San Francisco, you'd have to not only pay California tax, the San Francisco, you not only have to pay federal, US, California, but you'd also have to pay for city, right? Same with Manhattan in New York. But then some states, it's much more relaxed. So I can't really answer that question. I would say you would want to talk to your accountant about that. Can you apply for a green card on E3? That is a good question. You technically are not supposed to have dual immigrant intent on the E3, but there are ways to have your employer sponsor you for permanent residence. You have to look closely at timing, okay? So that basically there's a window of time where you don't have to show whether you have immigrant intent. So this is very technical, and I would encourage you to have your employer talk to their immigration lawyer about the timing of your green card process. But I want to make sure that you are born in Australia, because for the green card process, it's based on your country of birth, and not your country of passport. So I have a lot of clients who are who have German passports or Australian passports or Canadian passports, but in fact they are born in another country. And if it's India or China, then you are actually treated as an Indian for purposes of the green card process. So for the person, okay. Okay. So yeah, I'm from Taiwan and I would like to set up my own business in America. Which type of visa I can apply? The E, perfect for you. I just helped another Taiwanese set up. She bought actually a house for, it's like a kind of elderly home. She bought one and she's running it. And she brings with her this knowledge of Chinese herbs and acupuncture, and she brings that knowledge to running this senior home in Southern California. So she just bought this business and got an E2. So yeah, that's a great question. I already have H-1B valid till 2023. I want to apply for EB-1 green card. How hard is it to get approved for that? So that's a really good question. I think you want to, if you are looking for an EB-1 based on extraordinary ability, we'd have to see if you qualify. There are some individuals who apply as international managers and executives. So they might have worked for a company in their home country and then were transferred here. I think it's hard to answer how hard it is to get approved for that without understanding whether you qualify as an individual of extraordinary ability. So we'd have to look at that and go from there. So, you saw the criteria, the 8, it's the same criteria for the green card. It's just a bit stricter of a standard. So the EB-1, if you're talking about extraordinary ability, there's also one for outstanding researchers and scientists. So I'm not sure if that's the EB-1. Can I change my lawyer in the process of EB-5 visa? I think so. You'd have to, that needs to be discussed between the new lawyer and the lawyer you're giving up. But yeah, you have the right to change your lawyer. I'm a startup with 2 interns on student visas. I want to convert them to full-time workers. Can you advise? So yes, it would depend on where they're from, what's their country of nationality, because if they are Canadian or Mexican or Australian, it's pretty easy. If they are from Chile or Singapore, it's also, we could get visas for them. But if they have to go through the lottery, there's the lottery. We also have to make sure you're paying them the prevailing wage for these visas. So it depends on where they're from, what's their role, what's your salary, what's your capability to give them work. So that's some of my advice on that. I'm going to graduate in April. I'm going to apply for an OPT. Yay, exciting, with STEM designation. In case I could not find a job within 90 days, what are the alternative options? I would encourage you to, just be an independent contractor, maybe set up your own business. That can buy you time. Say you're self-employed, setting up your own company. So guys, it is 8:30 and I know we're going to wrap up. Let me see how many more questions I have. Let's see. Okay, let me see how many I can get through, you guys. And then let's see. We have a lot. Hold on. Bear with me. Do people from Brazil for an investment visa? So they can apply. They are not eligible for the e-visa. They could apply for the $1.8 million green card, and they also can apply. So if you invest 980,000, that can also get you a green card based on investment. So it's close to $1 million. You're right. So yeah, people from Brazil can apply for the green card based on investment because you have the right amounts. I have heard of stories where TN visa holders from Canada face very difficult Homeland Security who want to cancel the TN. How do these things can be handled? Is it very risky to be on TN? It's not been my experience at all. So long as the person qualifies, we get them approved. I've never had anyone denied. Now, I have had cases where it is maybe like they're rejected and then we go back. So what happens is someone is rejected and then they call me and I look at their materials and I help them fix it, and then they just try again with the cleaned up materials and it works. So the only category that's under a lot of scrutiny is management consultant. So if you're going to be a management consultant for a company, they do look at those very closely and they can deny those. So I had that denied once because she had worked for 3 years already for the company as a management consultant. And then when she went to renew it, and I told her this would be risky because the government doesn't like to see renewals of management consultant, we went ahead and tried it and it was denied. Okay. I have an Instagram blog that I'm looking to monetize. Is it okay to be a part-time blogger on an H-1B visa? Yeah, that should be fine. It's not employment. You're not working for Instagram. You're not working for someone else as the blogger. I think to be entrepreneurial in this way is fantastic. If you're starting to make a lot of money, you need to talk to your accountant about how to report that income. What are the chances to get a visa for an MD? I think you have to find an employer. So, there's a lot of credentialing to get done as a foreign medical graduate. But I think if you can find an employer, then that should be fine. We do have a lot of Americans, but what we don't have, where a lot, actually, I have a number of my own cousins who have gotten H-1Bs because they have worked in underserved areas. So if you are very interested in coming in as a doctor, what you should be looking at are hospitals and clinics in underserved areas. They are desperate for doctors, and that's where you could you could find a way in. Research associate at any good university, is there any salary restrictions? Yeah, they have to pay you the prevailing wage if you're coming in on the H-1B. If you're coming in on the J-1, which is available as a scholar, then there are no salary restrictions except for under state law. They have to pay you like minimum wage, stuff like that. Okay. So is the minor eligible for O1 visa? I think I answered that yes. So my son, after study in Colorado, doing research for his professor using OPT STEM visa, this is his 3rd year. Can he get extended? I'm not sure where your son is from, but it sounds like the only option is really is the H-1B. And if he has not been selected in the lottery, well, I mean, the professor could sponsor him for a role on the H-1B, and they're not subject to the lottery. So you can't extend your OPT after you're done with the 3 years. That's it. But he could talk to that professor about being sponsored for an H-1B, which universities can do. There's no lottery issue, but there could be prevailing wage issues. Because like you said, he's being paid minimum wage. So that could be the limitation on that situation. So I got a question about, you're born in India, but German citizenship, you will be treated as an Indian for purposes of the green card process. Okay. This is a great question. How long does marriage-based green card take? Well, if you're married to a U.S. citizen, it takes about a year to 18 months. But I love this question. Also, do parking traffic tickets count against getting a green card? No, they do not. In fact, also speeding tickets don't really count. Where tickets like that, speeding tickets or, traffic violations count is if there's alcohol or drugs involved, or it was reckless, or it was someone got hurt. Okay. And that's really, those are the ones. But in your application for green card, they actually specifically say, don't worry about traffic violations. Oh, this is another great question. If someone had the H-1B about 15 years ago, but only used it for 1.5 years at that time, if they apply for H-1B now, do they need to go to the lottery? No, they don't. They will be able to get the 6 years minus 1.5, so 4.5. Now, there could be like some pushback from the government, some requests for evidence. They're kind of confused because probably 15 years ago, you didn't have to go through the lottery. But still, if there is a very clear category for people who want to recapture H1, use up their full 6 years, they are allowed to do that. And so you would fall underneath that exception. But sometimes the government just doesn't remember, doesn't understand. So you kind of have to educate them. Okay. How long does it take for the employer to issue a TN visa? So the employer doesn't issue the TN visa, it's the government. They have to, depending on if you are Canadian or Mexican, but generally it could take a little bit longer because with Mexico, you have to apply at the consulate. If you're Canadian, you apply at the border. Generally, the fee for Canadians is $56 at the border. But otherwise there's legal fees if you hire a lawyer to help with preparing the materials to present at the border. So recommendations for a Mexican entrepreneur who wants to start a company in the US. Yeah, I would encourage you, the E2 visa, which I described, could be a really good option. I have a podcast on that. You can listen to that. You can review the slides on the E2. But I would say an E2 is a great option if you want to start a company in the US. Okay. All right. So if you have a charge, even if it's expunged, you have to report it you have to report it on your applications, your visa applications, at the consulates, and in your green card application. Um, it'll show up on your FBI report. So you can't say you don't have any offenses. When you are describing what happened, you can explain it was expunged, but you need to disclose. You cannot answer no if you've been to the question, have you ever been arrested or charged or convicted? Okay, you have to answer that yes. Um, if you have an income tax penalty, this really comes up in the context of naturalization. It definitely will not come up in your H-1B extension. It really doesn't come up with your green card. It comes up with naturalization about the income taxes. Okay. Now, the one thing I do want to mention where it could come up now in the green card application is that there's a declaration of self-sufficiency, a form I-944, and in there this could come up. And it could be a factor in determining whether you are someone who can support yourself. So yeah, it could come up. But then, the question is presenting it in a way that it's minimized and also shows that this is something you have completely under control. Okay, so this question about this question keeps coming back about working for your company abroad. I feel I've answered that a couple times. So if it's not clear, you can just email me, because I think something's getting lost in translation. With a peer network, I volunteer as a peer, but I opted in to not get paid for it. If the peer network still pays me some percentage of their profits, then will this work affect my H-1B employment? That's a good question. I don't think that's, you're volunteering. I'm hoping that you're, if you're working full time on your H-1B and continuing to comply with your status, you're fine. The percentage of their profits that you get, you want to talk to your accountant about reporting. But so long as you don't consider your volunteer work at the peer network as any kind of employment, it should be fine. Okay. Okay. Sorry, guys. I'm just trying to get through. I think I'm almost there. So here's a question. My spouse and I are both employees of US companies. Is it common for an employee to ask the company employer to start the visa process and me as the employee to cover the expenses? The idea would be to make it more attractive for my employer to be the sponsor. How could I have an estimate or idea of how much this could be? So, this is a good question. It depends on the kind of visa category. For the H-1B, no, you cannot pay for any of it. For the others, you can certainly offer, and that's fine. If this is about the green card process, you cannot pay for the test of the labor market piece. Okay. Insofar as how could I have an estimate or idea how much this would cost, it would depend on the visa that you're applying for. You know, if you look at my slides, the different visas have different fees. And then there's the legal fees if you're hiring a lawyer to help you. So there's not one amount. And it really depends on what visa you're talking about, what process you're talking about. And again, as I mentioned, certain visas, you cannot you could not pay for them. The employer needs to pay. Okay, but you definitely can offer with certain visas. I have clients who do that, and with the green card process, the part that the employer has to pay, you can offer to pay the other portions. I have I-140 approved. My H-1B got rejected last week, and my current H-1B is valid until February 16th. If I switch to H-4 EAD, can I switch back to H-1B later using my approved I-140? Yeah, you can. What are your recommendations regarding finding a U.S. employer willing to sponsor a Canadian engineer with oil and gas experience for TN and H-1B visa? Well, one, I would look on LinkedIn. I would look on Indeed. I would, do your general job search where you would look for employers. LinkedIn is a great tool. And then once you have that employer, then I think you want to tell them that you will need visa sponsorship, and then you can explain to them that what the visa is, and you maybe want to propose a lawyer to them that could help. So those are my recommendations. I have that podcast with Thursday Roberts, who's a recruiter, on how foreign nationals can talk to employers about the visa issue. Maybe that's a good resource for you too. But definitely I would look on LinkedIn. Okay, let's see. Sorry, just let me go back. So for the O1, for the minors, it's not that it's looser, but it definitely, because they want to know that you're a leader in the field. So if you're a minor, it could be harder to show you're a leader in the field unless it is an industry, like athletics or dance or there are child actors that are just extraordinary. But I think in this field that you're saying, cognitive neuroscience industry, it may be possible, but I think they're not going to be looser on the minor. In fact, sometimes for my young clients, like I have clients straight out of Stanford, for example, they're 22, 23, and they're going for the O1. What I really argue is that it's a young field, like data analytics, right? It's a relatively young field. And so I argue that my client is just at the cutting edge of this. They've been working with professors at Stanford. They help professors write a paper. They've gotten whatever, $500,000 in funding from venture capitalists to set up a firm that is all about data analytics. So what I am doing, I think a young age works against people, because USCIS is like, how could you be at the top of your field already? Right? So what we have to show is actually the field is young. And so this person's actually at the forefront, even though they're young. Okay. L1 has to go back, though has validity until next year. Can L2 work? Yeah. I mean, the L2 could stay, and well, when you say the L1 has to go back, have they been terminated? Because if they've been terminated, then the L2 status ends, because the L2 status is dependent on the L1. So if the reason that you're going back is a termination from the U.S. entity, so even if it's that you're going back to work for the parent company or whatever, the sponsoring company in your home country, it's a little tricky. Technically this person's status is tied to you, and so should not continue working without authorization. I mean, shouldn't continue working, but the EAD is valid. So, if you want to take that risk, you can. It's a bit of a gray zone, but definitely if the L1 is going back because of termination, um, then no, the L2 should not work. If there's a question, any suggestions where to find employers for MD? I'm not a doctor, so I don't know where to find. I would just encourage you to look on. I'm not a doctor, so I don't know where doctors look for jobs. But perhaps you can post a question on LinkedIn and see uh, where doctors in America look for jobs. Can I invest in a parking lot rental as a business? That's possible. It would have to make sense with your background. We'd have to look at the business. I mean, the problem with parking lot rentals is that there's not a lot of, you're not going to hire employees really. So I think this could be more on the passive income side. It sounds more like buying an apartment building and renting it out. So I don't know exactly if this would qualify. Okay, but we would have to look at, I mean, are there people that are working there? But I think this would be probably not a strong case. So, this is a question I get a lot, and it's a good question. If employer doesn't have the budget to sponsor H-1B, can I pay for the processing while the employer can sign all the legal and other documents? So, under the law, no, you're not supposed to be paying it. The employer actually signs saying that they are paying for everything and you haven't paid for anything. Now, do people break this rule? I mean, do people disregard this rule? Yeah, they do. So it's up to you if you want to take that risk, but the employer is signing saying that you have not paid for any of these fees. If you get promoted to an engineering manager, management leadership role, then can you switch your existing EB2 green card application to EB1? Okay, that's a good question, but it's for the EB, if you're talking EB1 as an international manager, you actually have to have worked abroad as a manager and then come into the US. So I don't know if that's it, but if you are talking about extraordinary ability, showing that you're an engineer of extraordinary ability, because you are a manager and in a leadership role, you could switch your existing EB2 to the EB1. You could use the priority date of your EB2 and move to EB1, which a lot of my clients have done. They go from EB2, they have a priority date of 2011 or 2012, and then they've been in their jobs for so long that they're just superstars at this point, and then they go for the EB1 extraordinary ability. I also have clients who get tired of waiting, and so they go and spend a year in Dubai or London or wherever, and they're a manager there, and then they come back as a manager here on the H-1B, and then they apply for the I-140. Okay. Okay. So this is a really good question, and I'm going to I'm gonna wrap up after this, but I really would, I think what I'll do is I will add you all to my listserv, and you can of course unsubscribe, but I do send out updates. I send out updates on the monthly visa bulletin that tells you how green card processing is going, and then please connect with me on LinkedIn. I'd be so happy to remain a resource to you. Let me just answer this one last question. It's a very good question, but it is technical. If a F1 applicant gets the approval of H1B, for example, December 2021, and his F1 will expire in 2023. I'm assuming that means the STEM OPT. Can he choose to remain in F1? Yes, he can. When must he accept this approved H1B before it becomes invalid? Normally, how long will this H1B last before it becomes invalid if he does not accept it? So what you can do, this is a great question. What you can do is actually when you file for your H1B petition, you can talk to your employer and you can talk to the lawyer and have them file your H1B petition as consular notification. What that means is it's approved, but it doesn't change your status from F1 to H1B. All it's doing is it says you're approved for H1B classification. When you're ready, you leave the country, pick up the H1B visa at the US consulate abroad, so usually in your home country, you re-enter the United States, and that is when you've activated your H1B status. You have to activate that H1B status in the 3-year validity period of that H1B approval. Okay, so that's, and a lot of international students want to do that because there's 2 reasons. Number one, there are lower tax obligations when you are an F1 student as opposed to when you have H1B status. And second, they want to maximize the amount of time they have in the US. So they want to use their full 3 years in OPT and STEM OPT and then start the 6-year clock of H1B time, right? You now have 9 years available to you. So that there are clients who do that. Now there are other clients who are like, I don't want to risk it, because one risk is that if you are terminated from that H1B employer before you activate your H1B status, you've lost the H1B. So this is a very technical question. What I recommend you do is when you're selected in the lottery and when you're filing, you want to have a conversation with the lawyer and the employer on what seems right for you. Okay? All right. Rob, I think we can wrap up. I'm going to stop the recording now. I'm going to stop